When Etten Patz disappeared on his way to school, his family were unaware of what had happened to him until after school hours were over and he never returned home. The search for Etten Patz began, and parents around New York became alarmed in such a way that they started changing the way many of them watched over their children. Now, almost 40 decades later, a man has been identified as the perpetrator. Ethan Khalil Patz was born on October 9, 1972 to Julian Stanley Patz in Manhattan, New York. He was the middle child. He had an elder sister and a younger brother. At the time of Etten's disappearance, he and his family lived in the Soho neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. Soho is an acronym for South of Houston Street, a name that was first used by renowned developer Chester Rapkin in 1962. Today, South of Houston Street is famous for its boutiques, art galleries, and loft living spaces. Famous celebrities like Dakota Fanning, Alicia Keys, Daniel Craig, John Legend, Justin Timberlake, and Samuel L. Jackson are known to reside or have resided there. The neighborhood might be safe for habitation now, but it wasn't always like that in the 1970s. It was much rougher. The overall appearance of New York City was substantially different back then than it is today. The city had been tainted by a financial crisis from which many believed it would never fully recover. There were high unemployment rates, a significant flight to the suburbs, and attacks on the subway. Times Square was known for its prostitutes and pimps, and Central Park was feared for robbery and rape. Abandoned buildings were occupied by drug dealers and the homeless. Tourists were not left out of attacks and robbery back then. The Council of Public Safety, decomposed of police, firefighters, and other unions, published a pamphlet titled Welcome to Fear City with a large skull on the cover. The pamphlet advised tourists not to go outside after 6 o'clock, not go out of Midtown. They must make a taxi call before leaving their hotels. They should never take a subway ride, and they should leave no belongings in the hotel safe at the time. When a visitor or tourist come to New York and see such pamphlet, they would undoubtedly turn around and leave. Consider what Etten Patz neighborhood may have looked like then. Boarded up buildings, shadowy alleys, no security cameras, and no cell phones. The morning of May 25, 1979, which appeared to have been a Friday, the final day of school before the Memorial Day holiday, was a chaotic one in the Patz household. Julie Patz, Etten's mother, who operated a daycare in their home, had her hands full that morning. She had two 2-year-olds to care for, her younger son and another kid who had spent the night. Also, Etten's older sister had resisted getting out of bed. Etten, on the other hand, woke up with a positive energy and was eager to start his day. According to Julie Patz, Etten had been attempting to be more independent, and in the midst of the chaos that morning, he saw an opportunity. He told his mom to allow him walk to school by himself. His mom recalled he pleaded, saying, "It's fine, Mom, I can do it." With some hesitation, Julie accepted. He then crammed his favorite toy cars into his tote bag, which was given to him by a friend's mother. Before leaving home, Etten donned his favorite headgear, an Eastern Airlines cap, after which his mother led him outside. He reportedly left with a $1 note in hand because he intended to get a soda on the way to school. It was the last time Julie, his mother, saw him. When Etten didn't return home that afternoon, she called around and discovered he hadn't made it to his bus or school. Julie claimed that she was shocked when she learned that Etten was missing. The Patz family house had been transformed into a command post where the press, volunteers, and police investigators had gathered. Etten's photograph was extensively publicized, appearing on television newscasts and the front pages of the city's newspapers. The city was covered in missing posters that featured an image of his hair poking out from under a cap. He was reportedly the first missing kid to appear on a milk container. The way he vanished, the ensuing search, and the anxiety it caused engulfed Lower Manhattan. Residents recalled police officers going from door to door, showing his photos and questioning people about where he could possibly be. Etten's disappearance caused a huge stir even outside his neighborhood. President Ronald Reagan declared May 25th, the day of his disappearance, to be National Missing Children's Day, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded in 1984. In part as a result of his disappearance. His case received a lot of attention, but there were no solutions. Numerous theories were put up, and a number of suspects came to light, including Jose Ramos, a man who had been convicted of abusing children and who the police had been hunting for years. Jose Ramos was romantically involved with a woman who had once been hired to accompany Etten home from school. As time went on, investigation refocused interest. Officials had searched the basement of a Lower Manhattan building for 8 hours in the year 2000. That building was where Ramos had previously resided. Investigators discovered pieces of bones, but it turned out that they belonged to animals. In the year 2012, after authorities discovered that a man by the name of Othniel Miller had laid a concrete floor soon after Etten vanished, they launched a search and dug up his workshop. Othniel Miller was a handyman who reportedly knew Eaton Patz. Eaton often visited him at his workshop. In fact, the $1 note that Eaton carried the morning he was last seen was given to him by Othniel Miller. However, the search, which sparked a fresh round of news media attention, failed to find Eaton's remains. But after a few weeks passed, a guy from New Jersey named Josie Lopez got in touch with the authorities and said that he thought his brother-in-law, Pedro Hernandez, might have something to do with Etten Patz's abduction. Back then, on May 25, 1979, Pedro Hernandez was an 18-year-old high school dropout who had recently relocated to Manhattan from Camden, New Jersey. He worked as a stock clerk in a bodega near Etten Patz bus stop on West Broadway and Prince Street. Shortly after Etten vanished, perhaps within days, Pedro Hernandez went back to New Jersey and took a job in a clothing factory there. Not long after, he suddenly began telling people that he had killed a child in New York City. At a spiritual retreat, he confided in an elder from his church group and confessed before a prayer group, breaking down in tears. He also confessed to his previous wife before they got married. However, their testimony indicated that the accounts varied. Pedro Hernandez's childhood friend thought he had killed a black child. His former wife, after hearing Muchacho, thought he had killed a teenage boy. Investigators questioned Pedro Hernandez after his brother-in-law dialed 911. The police claimed that after spending many hours with the detectives, Pedro gave in. He claimed that he had asked Etten Patz if he wanted a soda in order to entice him down the bodega's basement. The little boy, who initially intended to buy a soda with his $1 bill, innocently followed him and was immediately attacked. In a segment of the interview that was captured on camera, Pedro Hernandez said to the detectives, "I grabbed him by the neck and I started to choke him." He refrained from claiming that he had killed Etten, explaining that the little boy was still alive when he had placed him in a plastic bag and then placed the bag inside of a box, which he then discarded about a block away. Pedro Hernandez's words have served as the foundation of the prosecution's case against him. Prosecutors have had little to work with in the absence of Etten's remains or any crime scene from which they could gather evidence. In addition to presenting the testimony of the investigators and the people he had confessed to decades before, they also played video recordings of the interviews Pedro Hernandez made to the police shortly before his arrest. The main focus of Pedro Hernandez's defense has been to cast doubt on his credibility. His attorneys contend that 56-year-old Pedro Hernandez has low intelligence as well as a personality condition that impairs his ability to discriminate between truth and fiction. Therefore, they claim just because he admitted to what he thought he had done does not indicate he actually did it. Becky Hernandez, Pedro Hernandez's youngest child, testified about her father's strange conduct, including his claims of seeing angels and devils watering a dead tree limb to make it grow and how she would catch him talking to himself. The defense, however, claimed that the initial suspect, Jose Ramos, the child molester who had been found guilty, had the chance and the incentive to have been accountable for Etten Patz's disappearance. Members of the jury were in doubts after hearing their arguments. There was a deadlocked jury after 18 days of deliberations. In 2015, the judge declared a mistrial. Only one member of the panel who didn't think Pedro Hernandez was guilty held out. However, following a 4-month trial on February 14, 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of murder and kidnapping. He was then sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Why do you think Pedro Hernandez committed such evil atrocity? Was he truly possessed by a demon? On July 16, 1980, Jeremy Stoner was born in California. He had 3 siblings. Justin was the younger brother, and Jason and Joshua were the older brothers. Their home was in Vallejo, California, a charming and picturesque community in its own right. Jeremy was a contented and lively youngster. He was devoted to both his friends and family. Attending school and picking up new skills was something he cherished. He also enjoyed watching cartoons, playing with his toys and riding his bike. He had a huge heart and a bright smile. It was February 21st, 1987, on a Saturday morning when 6-year-old Jeremy and his two older brothers, aged 11 and 9 years, were playing outside close to their home. A relative was keeping an eye on Jeremy and his brothers while their parents were at work. Their relative had to abruptly depart to take her sick daughter to the hospital. The boys were instructed to wait at home for their parents to return. Rather, they made their way to a neighbor's residence. While they were there, a neighbor scolded Jeremy for spilling ketchup, and they left right after. At 5 p.m., the boy's mother came home to find the house unoccupied, leading her to believe that the boys were playing at the neighbor's, as they frequently did. However, when the two older boys returned 2 hours later without Jeremy, the family initiated a search. They contacted the police since Jeremy was nowhere to be found. It didn't take long for Vallejo police to conclude that Jeremy had been abducted. He was last seen, according to reports, at a Dairy Queen on Springs Road, which is roughly 5 minutes' walk from the family's house. Around 7:30 that evening, a worker there reported to the investigators that he had seen Jeremy with an adult guy. 4 days later, on February 25, 1987, Jeremy's body was discovered on Sherman Island in Sacramento County. For people heading along Sherman Island Road in the Delta became bogged in the mud. In search of something to put between the tires, the driver got out. What she rather found was a small boy's body. He had been beaten, stabbed, and choked. They contacted the authorities and informed them of their discovery. Investigators quickly made their way to the crime scene and gathered all the evidence they could and stored it for later use. In Vallejo, word of Jeremy's passing traveled fast. The people were horrified by what had happened to him and were devastated. They wanted to do everything in their power to help his family since they felt bad for them. They hugged them and handed them flowers and cards. When Jeremy vanished, they looked for him. They held a candlelight vigil. They offered prayers for him and his family as well. Terry Curdola was Vallejo's mayor at the time. He claimed that for 4 days, the residents of Vallejo joined the Stoner family. He restated that they had looked, prayed, and wept for him. It wasn't long until a suspect walked right inside the Vallejo Police Department. Approximately a week after Jeremy's death, Sean Quincy Melton, an unemployed security guard, informed authorities he could have information regarding the case. Melton acknowledged that he tried to dazzle police with his rudimentary research. To use his own words, he aspired to be a big shot. However, Melton's gradual change from a swaggering detective to a confused crime suspect was captured on camera. Throughout his interrogation, he had a terrible past and a disturbing mentality, as indicated by his authorship of The Wolf's Den, a book about child exploitation. Despite his insistence that it's a work of fiction, others questioned whether it was completely unrelated to his personal experiences. Sean Melton willingly went to the police station to give details about the case. He mentioned that he had heard tales and seen certain things that could help identify the offender. The police, however, suspected that he was involved in the crime. There was good cause for them to be skeptical about Sean Melton. Prior to his appointment, Sean Melton's psychologist reported to the police that he had admitted to having unsettling ideas about young boys. The doctor voiced worries that Sean Melton might be dangerous and might be connected to the case of Jeremy Stoner. Sean Melton was the target of a lengthy 30-hour interview by the police, during which they tested him with a polygraph and asked a lot of questions. They also drew a sketch of him and contrasted it with the kidnapper's description provided by a witness. Their aim was to gather intelligence and possibly determine his connection to the case. Sean Melton adamantly maintained his innocence, stating that he was unaware of the situation and denied any role in the crime. The polygraph test was successfully completed by him, and the sketch of him did not match the witness's account. He insisted that his only goal was to help the police crack the case. Still, the police continued to pursue Sean Melton and proposed a fresh theory. They claimed Sean Melton had numerous personality disorders and speculate that the crime may have been committed by one of his alter egos, John Wolfe. They asserted that Sean Melton did not recall committing these acts. In retaliation, the police detained Sean Melton and accused him of kidnapping and killing Jeremy. However, there was insufficient evidence to convict him. There were 2 trials, but the jury were unable to come to a unanimous decision in both cases. The judge was forced to dismiss the case as a result. Sean Melton died in 2000, but he never acknowledged having anything to do with the terrible end of Jeremy Stoner. Because there had been no development and no new leads or evidence, the Jeremy Stoner case was labeled a cold case and went unresolved for several years. However, there was a noteworthy advancement in Jeremy Stoner's situation in 2023. Thanks to cutting-edge technology, the authorities were able to obtain a fresh lead through DNA testing. Jeremy's remain samples were compared to those in a criminal database by the police via DNA testing. This development promised to throw fresh light on the enduring enigma surrounding Jeremy's terrible end. When the police discovered a match, they eventually located the offender. The name of the perpetrator is Fred Kane III. 69-year-old Kane was taken into custody from his Central Point, Oregon residence. District Attorney Krishna Abrams expressed gratitude for having cold case investigators who are so committed to solving these horrifying murders, regardless of the passage of time. According to 1984 media accounts, Kane, who was 30 at the time, was allegedly accused of attacking a 17-year-old in San Bernardino County. On suspicion of attacking the teenager at knife point, Kane and his roommate were taken into custody. Kane was charged with forceful assault and weapon usage, with enhancements for 4 previous jail terms, but a jury ruled him not guilty later that year. Because the investigation is still underway, the District Attorney's Office for Solano County has stated that it will not be providing any more information. But Martinez police have probably noticed Kane's arrest. From the start, Jeremy's case and Eric's decoys were frequently brought up in the same sentence. Just 1 month before Jeremy's disappearance on January 19, 1987, 9-year-old Eric rode his bike from his Martinez home to a relative's house. Eric rode the trip frequently and knew it well. He left his house at about 11 in the morning, knowing that once he got to his relative's house, a few blocks away, he would call just like he always did. After he failed to return home, a search was conducted. His remains were discovered not far from Martinez Junior High School. After receiving about a dozen stab wounds, he passed away from his wounds. Subir Chatterjee lived in Houston, Texas in 2002. He was originally from Sri Lanka. Subir owned and operated the Coastal Gas Station convenience store. On February 15, 2002, around 12:50 p.m., officers with the Oak Ridge North Police Department were dispatched to Subir's store because witnesses heard gunshots. Officers who arrived at the scene found Subir's body in the office area of the gas station. He had been shot in the head. It was also discovered that someone had taken $160,000 in cash from the store. Investigators collected forensic evidence at the crime scene, including DNA that belonged to the person who took Subir's life. The DNA was found under Subir's fingernails. There was also blood from the suspect found. It was stored so it could be used later. At the time, law enforcement had few leads. The witnesses' descriptions were vague and with no surveillance footage. There were no suspects. The case went cold for almost 20 years. Detective Ken Hubbard, who was the first one to arrive on the scene, persisted in investigating the case. He worked various leads all the time before coming across an article outlining how law enforcement in California use genealogy and DNA to solve cold cases. Hubbard then reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, an organization that uses genetic genealogy, phenotyping, ancestry, and kinship analysis to assist law enforcement in developing potential suspects for cases where DNA evidence is present. With the agreement of the Oak Ridge Police Department and the assistance with the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, Hubbard requested and received funds to pay for the testing. In 2018, Parabon told Hubbard they identified 3 possible men whose DNA might be a match for the DNA sample found at the crime scene back in 2002. In 2019, investigators followed one of the men to a restaurant. There, they collected his DNA sample from a fork, coffee cup, and a piece of toast. After more DNA testing, on December 4, 2019, it was announced that the DNA from the crime scene matched Martin Isaac Tellez's DNA. On December 10, 2019, Tellez was arrested for the crime. Following the arrest, Tellez confessed to taking Subir's life while robbing him. He explained that his blood was present at the scene because Subir struck him in the head with a telephone to defend himself. While the case was pending, Tellez was out on a $500,000 bail. He cut off his GPS monitoring device and fled to Mexico. Fortunately, agents from Homeland Security and the U.S. Marshals successfully tracked him down and brought him back to the U.S. His trial started in 2022. On June 28th, he pleaded guilty. Tellez was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Assistant District Attorney Donna Hansen said, "Martin Tellez lived more than 20 years of his life with his family and his loved ones around him. Meanwhile, members of the Chatterjee family were left with an empty chair and aching hearts, believing they might never know who was responsible." Detective Ken Hubbard never gave up on this case, and it was my privilege to be able to assist him in bringing justice and closure to Sabir's family. Every life taken creates a wound in our community and in the lives of the victim's family. Some of those wounds, like the loss of this beloved father and husband, are very deep. In this case, those wounds were laid bare for decades. District Attorney Brett Lejon said, "Fortunately, a relentless instrument of dog justice in the form of Detective Hubbard made what was wrong right, and we hope that this measure of accountability will bring some relief to his grieving family." 37-year-old Lena Reyes Geddes lived in Youngstown, Ohio with her husband Edward Geddes. On April 8, 1998, Lena left her home on a trip from Ohio to Dallas and then to Mexico to visit her family. That would be the last time anyone would see Lena alive. 6 months later, with no sign of Lena since she left their home, Edward reported his wife missing. Investigators found it a bit strange that it took 6 months for Edward to report her missing. He was named a suspect, but investigators couldn't find enough concrete evidence against him. Edward was interviewed by police in October 1998. During the interview, he claimed his wife had planned to fly from Pittsburgh and dropped her off at the airport. On April 20, 1998, an unidentified deceased female was located along State Route 276 near Maidenwater Spring in Utah's Garfield County. When investigators arrived, they found a woman in her late 30s to mid-40s, covered with plastic bags, wrapped in duct tape, tied with rope, and placed inside a sleeping bag before being wrapped in a carpet. The woman had been shot. Her hands were cut off, which made identifying her really difficult. Sketches of the woman were shared around, hoping someone would recognize her. Despite an exhaustive investigation by the Garfield County Sheriff's Office and the Utah State Bureau of Investigation, the woman was not identified, and the case went cold. Since the woman could not be identified, she became known as the Maidenwater Jane Doe. In 2018, Ohio updated Lena's missing persons file and obtained a picture of her from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A private citizen in California who enjoys researching true crime cases then linked the Maidenwater Jane Doe case to Lena. The internet sleuth noticed the mole in the right ear and told Utah authorities to call Youngstown's police about the missing case involving Lena. Lena's sister traveled from Mexico to offer DNA swabs. Not long after, investigators were able to confirm that the Maidenwater Jane Doe is indeed Lena Reyes Geddes. The question now was who took Lena's life. They interviewed a lot of people that knew her. They wanted to talk to her husband Edward Geddes, but he had taken his own life back in 2001. Another man police looked into was Scott Kimball. He took the lives of at least 4 people and is suspected in many other cases. Kimball was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. Investigators decided to try and find DNA on the plastic bags, rope, sleeping bag, and other items found at the crime scene. They were able to find DNA belonging to a male on the rope. They wanted to compare Edward's DNA to see if it belonged to him, but he had been cremated so they couldn't exhume him. After family members of his were tracked down, their DNA samples were obtained. Finally, in 2022, it was confirmed that Edward Geddes' DNA matched the DNA of the unknown man found on the road. Investigators announced at a press conference in June of 2022 that they have enough evidence to say he was the one who took her life and to close the case. While it is frustrating that Edward is not alive anymore to face the charges against him, we at least know he was miserable, because he took his own life. Investigators have found no sign that Lena traveled anywhere and believe her trip was a ruse by Edward. They don't know why Edward drove across the country to dispose of his wife's remains or why he decided to take her life. Utah State Bureau of Investigation agent Brian Davis said at the press conference, "There's a lot of ups and downs in law enforcement, but I would put this case at the top of just making you feel good." At least there's some closures. At least there's answers. Davis also mentioned it's not just the DNA that they have as evidence against Edward, but also other circumstantial evidence. Lena's sister Lucero, who had given her DNA to help identify Lena, said, "I felt like for 20 years no one would listen to me, but now I know what happened. I'm here to bring her home, not like I expected, but I'm bringing her back home with me." 25-year-old Lori Houts lived in Mountain View, California in 1992. She worked as a computer engineer. On September 5th of same year, Lori's body was found in her car in Mountain View, near a garbage dump about a mile away from her workplace. Rope was used to strangle her and was still around her neck. Police found footprints on the inside of her windshield. Investigators quickly identified a prime suspect, John Kevin Woodward. He was allegedly openly jealous of Lori. Woodward had developed a romantic attachment to Lori's boyfriend, who was also his roommate. In the late 1990s, Woodward was tried twice in the case, but it was unsuccessful. The case was dismissed by a judge for insufficient evidence after a jury could not reach a verdict after the second trial. Woodward's fingerprints were found located on the outside of Lori's car, but investigators could not prove he was inside of the car. Woodward moved to the Netherlands after the trial. Later on, he would become the president and CEO of the Bay Area company, ReadyTech. It is an online training company. Investigators did not give up on Lori's case and still followed up on leads and searched for evidence. In late 2020, investigators resubmitted all the forensic evidence they had for further analysis. Over 80 latent fingerprints that were collected at the crime scene were re-examined by the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office Identification Unit. This resulted in even more fingerprints matching Woodward. His fingerprints were found in places only the person who took her life could have touched. John Woodward was apprehended by police at JFK Airport in New York on July 9, 2022, after arriving from Amsterdam. If convicted, Woodward faces life in prison. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker of the Santa Clara County's DA office had this to say, "I'm thrilled that we have a second chance to seek justice for Lori after nearly 30 years. It's so rare that new evidence is discovered decades after it is dismissed, giving us another shot at holding Mr. Woodward accountable. The arrest of Mr. Woodward is a testament to the advances in forensic science. Without those advances, we never would have been able to refile this case. The fact that police didn't start regularly collecting DNA evidence until maybe 20 to 25 years ago makes cold case investigations very challenging. For example, Lori's purse and wallet might have had a lot of DNA on them, but testing was impossible because they were contaminated with fingerprint dust. Lori's family issued a statement. Lori and Houch was a beloved family member and friend to many. Although she was only 5 foot tall, she had a huge heart and her humor and spunk were endearing to all. The way Lori lived and treated people was a stunning example of what was right in the world. She was a gem to so many. But her bright life was taken from us at the age of 25. We are hopeful that justice can finally be served for Lori, and incredibly appreciative of law enforcement agencies who have never given up on her. To keep her memory alive, Lori's family established the Lori House Memorial Girls Athletic Scholarship, whose donations go to graduating female seniors. 54-year-old Nora Sheehan lived in Cork, Ireland. She was a mother of 3. Nora was last seen when she attended a medical appointment for a dog bite at the South Infirmary Hospital on June 6, 1981. When Nora did not return home after her appointment, her family reported her missing. The National Police Service of the Republic of Ireland, or the Gardaí, as they are more commonly referred to, started searching for Nora. 6 days later, Nora's body was found by forestry workers at the viewing point in the Chippewa Woods. It's about 18 miles from where she was last seen. It was not revealed how her life was taken, but the investigators simply noted that it was violent. Despite the Gardaí investigating the case, they could not identify the person that took her life. In 2016, the Gardaí Serious Crime Review team reopened the cold case and spent several years examining all details associated with it. In June of 2022, detectives arrested 73-year-old Noel Long at his home in Maubancork in connection to Nora's case. He was then taken to Bond and Garda Station. A short hearing was held where it seems that Long will take a guilty plea. His attorney Eddie Burke said that his client was a 73-year-old man in receipt of a state pension. Burke also requested that Long will receive all necessary medical treatment while on remand because he has severe medical issues. Detectives have not made it public what exactly led them to Noel Long, because it is still an ongoing investigation.